Hello. Today I will be ranking the 26 letters of the English alphabet from worst to best. So let's quickly get started. At the bottom, I have the letter Q. Q literally makes just a good sound. It makes the epic Q sound, but every time it's in a word, it has to have the U behind it, which basically defeats the whole purpose of the Q sound. At number 25, we have C. C usually makes the k or sometimes the s sound, but there are already letters for that, S and K, so they're basically just a messed up version of those letters. At number 24, we have X. X usually isn't that bad of a letter, but a lot of people think that it can just be replaced by KS. But X is literally just not used a lot to be recognized, and it's not very considered as a likable letter in the alphabet. Next up, we have Y. Y is a good letter and all, but it's always confusing to determine if it's going to be a vowel or a consonant. Y makes the y sound, but it's also used in the end of words like bury, bury, but it makes the I sound, which makes it very confusing, just like most of the other vowels. Next up, we have G. G usually makes the g sound, but sometimes it can make the j sound for no apparent reason, when just like C, we have letters for that. G is usually a good letter overall, but just because of that unnecessary sound that a rare letter can't has to is already rare enough is taking sounds from it. Next up, we have W. W is fine overall. It makes the W sound, but the only problem I really have for this low is being the name. The name is W, and in French, it's called double V, which is really too long. What I've always wanted to do is to not bring back the old English character win, but just take the name win and replace it for W. Next up, we have the really, truly, officially vowel, and that's E. E, just like most vowels, makes all sorts of sounds, but it's supposed to make the E or S sound. It's also kind of wonky for being at the end of the words and just being silent, like in the word bake, Bake. All it does is make A say its name. Next up is another vowel, I, which kind of responds correspondingly to Y, being in some end of the words, but making different sounds sometimes. So it's basically just a version of Y that I think is a little better. Next up, we have S. S is one of those common letters that makes sounds that have to go with the H, like sh, th, or ch. And that even though it's a good letter making the s sound, it's also kind of lazy for making C do all the work, but yet C is a bad letter. Next up, we have H. H is the letter that is probably used the most and backed with other letters like S, T, and C for making the th, ch, and sh sound when I think it's doing too much work. But I don't think it's a well enough letter to go high, so I'm placing it down at this position. Now we have U. U, to me, should make the most common sound in the alphabet, but instead it makes the U or sound. And I feel like that because of these vowels, it just makes it a little better than I and E, but it's just not good for me. Now we have J. J makes the J sound, and I think it's better than G because it just looks cooler. And G was actually originally a C, that just got added mini 7 to it. Next up, we have T. Well, I think a lot of people would put T up closer to the top because it's a more common letter. And that's true because T does make a really common sound, T, but it needs to be backed by H or even CH to make different sounds like ch or th. Next up, we have P. I honestly don't think I should have placed P in front of T or H, and that's because P is kind of an underrated letter, but it's honestly fine other than making the f sound with P and H. But P overall is supposed to make the P sound, but I'm not placing it any higher because of the f sound. Next up, we have O. O, just like most vowels going to talk about, makes multiple different sounds, but it's supposed to make the O or oh sound. And basically just the same story for every letter. The only reason I think it's better is because the most common basic English word is toe, because the letter that is most commonly in front of words is T, most commonly in the back is E, and most commonly in the middle is O. And so I really have no bad respects for it. Next up, we have Z, which is at the last of our alphabet. Even though it's rare, I think it should be higher up. Z makes a Z sound, which is one of those six sounds like J or Q make, but it's just not good for me because it does everything right. It's just like X. It's so uncommonly used that it shouldn't even be like that. Next up, we have F. F is similar to what I was talking about with P, when it's kind of being lazy for making P and H do work to make its own sound. But F overall, making the F sound is fine. Next up, we have M. M is probably one of the most basic unsigma os sounds in this whole alphabet, just making the M sound, and is in common letters. But overall, it's fine. And now we have what I think is the best vowel, and that's A. A makes the ah or a sound, and it's mostly higher up because of our childhoods learning the ABCs, and it also is probably the least confusing out of all the other vowels. Now we have N. N is basically just a softer version of M, making the N sound. I also think N is better than M because it's more common or similarly common, but I believe it's more common. But it also does better in words than the M, I feel like. Next up, we have D. D makes the D sound and is pretty common overall, and I really see no problems with it. It's just the way things were laid out and the way things were learned. I think D goes below the rest. Similar to D, we have a little harder version of D, and that's B, which makes the B sound. And B is probably higher than D, even though being very similar vocal wise, and that's because of the ABC thing again. Because being one of the original, some people say the original letters. Next up, we have V, which makes another sigma sound like J or Q. V. V is honestly such a good sound for me that I think it should be used more in more letters, but V is just an underrated letter that isn't very used. Now we have the number 3 letter, L. L is a basic letter enough, but it's pretty unique compared to other languages, making the O sound, like in words like long. But L is more significant because L makes one of those sounds, ol, that is well needed in the language. In fact, J wasn't admitted into the English language until about 500 years ago, even though J was a really common sound. Number 2, we have K. K is basically a little bit of a rarer version than C, but more common than Q, which also makes the K sound. I think but K instead of C is built for the K sound and usually doesn't make any other sounds, which is why I think it's one of the best letters. Now at number 1 we have R. R is similar to K, and it makes the sound, but doesn't really make any other sounds other than that. But the only thing is that puts R in front of K is that it's because it's more common than R. Actually, very common. I believe it's the third most common letter in the alphabet behind E and K. But anyway, those are my rankings of the alphabet's letters. If you want to disagree with me or say something else in the comments, feel free to do so.